The morning Howard Finch walked into Delwood Veterinary Clinic, he was not there to be kind. He was there to assess the property. He stood in the waiting room doorway in a pressed charcoal jacket and looked at the space the way a man looks at something he has already decided to dispose of. The linoleum was old. The front counter had a crack along one edge that had been filled with wood putty and painted over. The chairs along the wall were mismatched in a way that suggested they had been added one at a time over many years rather than purchased together. Finch looked at all of this and allowed a small, satisfied expression to settle on his face, the kind that does not require an audience but does not mind having one either. The receptionist, a young woman named Petra, asked if he had an appointment. Finch told her he was here about the building, not the animals. He handed her a card and said to give it to the owner when he had a moment. He did not sit in one of the mismatched chairs. He stood near the window and scrolled through his phone. What Howard Finch did not know, because he had not done the kind of research that requires more than a surface scan, was that the man whose name was on the door had spent 14 years as a senior veterinary researcher at Kellerman Agricultural Sciences before coming back to his hometown and opening a small animal practice. He did not know that the man had developed 2 diagnostic protocols during those years that were now used as standard procedure in large animal practices across 6 states. He did not know that the quiet of the clinic, the slightly worn chairs, the old linoleum, was not the quiet of a man who had run out of options. It was the quiet of a man who had chosen exactly this, on purpose, and knew the difference between the two. He was still scrolling when the door at the back of the waiting room opened and Webb Carver came through it. Webb was 51 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of hands that had done real work for a long time. He wore a gray clinic coat with his name embroidered above the left pocket, and he had a small smear of something on his left sleeve that he had not noticed yet. He looked at the card Petra handed him, then at the man standing by the window. Finch introduced himself as the Regional Development Director for Vantage Medical Group, which had recently acquired the 2 largest veterinary chains in the state and was currently expanding its network of affiliate clinics in secondary markets. He said Delwood was in a target zip code. He said the offer his company had in mind would be worth Webb Carver's time to hear. Webb listened to all of it with the same expression he brought to most things, attentive, unhurried, not giving anything away. Then he said he appreciated Finch coming by, and that he was in the middle of a surgical follow-up and would need to get back. He said Petra could give Finch his email if he wanted to send over the details in writing. Finch looked at the waiting room again, slowly, the way you look at something you are doing someone a favor by wanting. He said the offer had a short window, that Vantage was looking at 2 other properties in the county, and that the kind of practice Webb was running here, given the overhead and the patient volume, was the kind that usually appreciated having options. The word usually landed with a specific weight. Webb registered it. He did not respond to it. He said he would look for the email. He thanked Finch for stopping in. He went back through the door. Finch left. Petra watched his car pull out of the lot, a company SUV, clean and black, and then went back to her desk. She had worked for Webb for 6 years. She had heard the whole conversation through the partially open window. She thought about saying something and decided the moment had passed. Webb did not think about Howard Finch for the rest of that day. He finished the surgical follow-up, checked on 2 boarded animals, spoke with a longtime client named Mrs. Eugenia Tabb, whose arthritic retriever he had been managing for 3 years, and then locked up at 6:15 and drove to his brother's house 4 streets over, where his son Aiden was spending the afternoon. Aiden was 9 years old and deeply serious about 2 things: the small aquarium he maintained in his bedroom with a focus that Webb found both impressive and slightly worrying, and the baseball cards he organized in binders with a system only he fully understood. He was sitting at the kitchen table when Webb arrived, eating crackers and explaining something to Webb's brother Dale, who was listening with the patient expression of a man who did not understand anything about fish but understood that the explanation mattered. Webb picked Aiden up at 6:30 and they drove home mostly in silence, the good kind of silence that happens between 2 people who are comfortable enough not to fill it. Webb made dinner. Aiden set the table. They ate. Aiden went to check on his aquarium. Webb sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the stack of quarterly records he had been meaning to go through for 2 weeks. He did not think about Howard Finch. He thought about the practice. He thought about the lease, which had 14 months left on its current term. He thought about the building next door, which had been empty since the feed supply company that occupied it had relocated. He thought about the fact that the building next door was twice the size of his current space and had been sitting vacant long enough that the landlord had twice called him about it, once directly and once through the property manager, suggesting that a combined lease arrangement might be mutually beneficial. He had not acted on those calls. He had noted them. He went to bed at 10:30. The records were still on the table. Webb Carver had grown up in Delwood, which was a mid-sized town in the agricultural middle of the state that most people from larger cities had never heard of, and most people from smaller towns considered a place you went when you had finally made something of yourself. His father had run a feed and supply operation for 30 years, the same one that had eventually moved out of the building next door to Webb's clinic, a coincidence that struck nobody as significant at the time. Webb had left Delwood at 18 for a veterinary science program and had stayed gone for 22 years. He had worked at Kellerman Agricultural Sciences from age 31 to 45, long enough to build a reputation that was specific and durable. The work at Kellerman had been research-focused, diagnostics and disease protocol development for large livestock operations, and he had been good at it in the way that people are good at things when the work fits something in them that needs to fit. He had come back to Delwood because his father's health had declined and because his son, after the divorce, needed stable ground under him. Webb had made the decision with the same directness he applied to clinical decisions. He looked at the available information, identified the course of action that addressed the most important variables, and took it. The small animal clinic had not been the plan, exactly. He had intended to consult from the town, to maintain his research connections remotely while being present for his father and Aiden. But the town had no small animal vet within 20 miles, and the nearest practice had closed 8 months before Webb arrived, and when he looked at the empty clinic space on Delwood's main commercial strip, and then looked at the number of people he kept running into at the grocery store who asked when someone was going to open something up, he made a second decision with the same directness. He had not announced himself. He did not send out letters or run an ad campaign. He opened the clinic, put a sign in the window, and people came because they had been waiting for someone to show up. What the town knew about Webb Carver was that he was good with animals and reliable, and that he had been somewhere else for a long time and was back now. What the town did not know, because Webb did not talk about it, and the information was not on any surface of the clinic, was that his name appeared on the protocols currently used by veterinary teams at 14 large-scale agricultural operations in the state, that 2 of those protocols had been cited in a federal food safety report issued 3 years ago, that he still received consulting fees from 2 Kellerman-adjacent firms for work he did in the evenings after Aiden was asleep, reading case files on his laptop and writing reports that were used by people who ran operations his clinic could not have served. His friend Henry Brask, who had been his roommate the first 2 years of graduate school and now ran a small agricultural investment firm out of the city 2 hours north, asked Webb about the clinic situation regularly. He asked with the specific curiosity of someone who understood the gap between what Webb was doing and what Webb was capable of doing, and who was waiting, without pressure, for Webb to be ready to talk about it. Webb's answer was always some version of the same thing. He was figuring it out. Henry understood this to mean that Webb already knew what he was going to do and was simply not ready to say it yet. Henry was patient. He had known Webb long enough to understand that patience in his direction was the only productive approach. The email from Howard Finch arrived 4 days after the clinic visit. It was professional, detailed, and framed the acquisition offer as an opportunity for Webb to transition out of a high-effort, low-margin operation into a well-compensated advisory role within Vantage's regional network. The number in the offer was not insulting, but it was structured in a way that assumed Webb was operating closer to the edge than he was. It assumed the worn chairs and old linoleum were evidence of distress rather than indifference to optics. It assumed that a man running a small clinic in a secondary market was a man who needed someone to open a door for him. Webb read the email twice. He typed a short reply thanking Finch for the detailed proposal and saying he would be in touch if his circumstances changed. He hit send. He went back to the intake form he had been reviewing. 3 weeks later, Howard Finch came back. This time he did not come alone. He brought a woman named Christine Aldgate, who was Vantage's regional acquisitions director, and who had the practice confidence of someone who closed deals for a living and who did not often find herself needing a second visit. She shook Webb's hand in the waiting room with the firm assurance of someone who considered the meeting largely a formality. They sat in Webb's small office, which smelled of antiseptic and old paper, and Christine Aldgate laid out the revised offer on the desk between them with the care of someone placing something valuable. The number was higher. The terms were more detailed. There was a slide in her folder showing the growth projections for Vantage's regional network. Then she said something that she intended as a compliment and that landed differently than she planned. She said that Vantage had looked at the practice's patient volume and service range, and that what Webb had built here was a solid community-level operation. She said the word solid twice. She said that community level was exactly the kind of presence, Vantage wanted to absorb into their network that it was the right scale for a suburban satellite location once Vantage had established its regional hub, which would be going into the renovated property on County Road 7. Webb asked which property on County Road 7. Christine told him. It was the old Belhaven facility, a decommissioned agricultural research center that had been sitting in a county land trust for 11 years. 42 acres, large infrastructure, 3 existing laboratory-grade buildings currently listed at a number that reflected how long it had been sitting and how little the county trust wanted to continue managing it. Webb's expression did not change. Christine kept talking. She said Vantage's plan was to convert Belhaven into a regional veterinary hub with full surgical suites, specialty referral capacity, and a diagnostics lab. She said it was a significant investment and that the company was confident in the model. Webb asked a few questions about the construction timeline. He asked about the diagnostics equipment they were planning to install. He listened to the answers with the focused attention of someone who is not just being polite. When Christine finished, Webb said he appreciated them coming back, and that he had nothing to add to his previous reply, and that he hoped the Belhaven project went well. Howard Finch, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, looked around the small office on his way out. He looked at the framed photo on the wall, a large group of researchers in front of a Kellerman facility building. Webb somewhere in the middle row, younger, in a white lab coat, standing with the casual ease of someone who belonged there completely. Finch looked at it for a moment, then looked away. He said something to Christine in the hallway that Webb did not hear. Petra watched their car leave. She came to the office doorway and looked at Webb, who was sitting at his desk looking at nothing in particular. She asked if he was okay. He said he was thinking about something. She nodded and went back to the front. He called Henry Brask that evening after Aiden was in bed. The call lasted 9 minutes. Webb described the meeting, the offer, and specifically, the Belhaven property. Henry was quiet for a moment after the Belhaven part, the kind of quiet that comes from a mind recalibrating quickly. He asked Webb how familiar he was with the facility. Webb said he had been inside it. He had spent 2 weeks there during the 3rd year of his time at Kellerman, when the facility was still operational and Kellerman had been contracted to run a disease surveillance study using its controlled environment buildings. He described the layout from memory: 3 primary structures, a connected utility corridor, cold storage capacity that was not common in that size of facility, a ventilation system in the main building that had been designed for pharmaceutical-grade air quality and was almost certainly still functional. He said the county had maintained the structural envelope because they were legally required to, and that based on the property records he had looked at twice in the past year without acting on, the infrastructure was in better shape than the listing price implied. Henry was quiet for a longer moment this time. Then he asked why Webb had been looking at the property records. Webb said he had been looking at them the way he looked at a lot of things, noting them, not acting yet. Henry said that was the most Webb Carver sentence he had heard in several years. Then he asked if Webb was ready to act now. Webb said that was what he was calling about. Henry said he would look at the numbers in the morning. The numbers, when Henry looked at them, were tighter than he would have designed from scratch, but not impossible. The acquisition cost was manageable. The rehabilitation cost, based on Webb's assessment of the existing infrastructure, was lower than any developer unfamiliar with the facility's original build quality would project. The operational model Webb had sketched, a full-service veterinary facility anchored by a diagnostics lab with large animal consultation capacity and a rural outreach component, was not a model that competed directly with what Vantage was planning on the same site. It was a better version of it, designed by someone who understood the agricultural context that Vantage's urban acquisitions team did not. Henry called a property attorney named Louise Keating. Louise was methodical and thorough and had handled 2 of Henry's prior acquisitions without error. She called him back in 3 hours with the current ownership details and disposition terms. The county land trust, she said, had been authorized to accept any offer above a modest threshold, provided the buyer could demonstrate financial qualification and a credible development plan. There was no indication they were fielding competing offers. Henry called Webb. Webb said to move forward. The offer went in through Louise's office under the name of Carver Agricultural and Clinical Services LLC, a company registered 6 days earlier, with Henry as co-investor and Webb as managing director. The company name was accurate and professional. It did not advertise its principals' backgrounds, and the county trust's administrative staff, processing the paperwork during a period when their attention was occupied by a separate municipal budget dispute, did not search further than the financial qualification documents which were in order. Webb walked the Belhaven property on a Saturday morning in early spring, while Aiden was at a baseball card show with Dale. He had arranged access through Louise's office. He moved through each of the 3 buildings over the course of 4 hours, checking load-bearing connections, HVAC access panels, electrical conduit runs, drain systems, the cold storage chambers on the east side of the main building. He did not take notes, which would have surprised anyone watching, because the pace and thoroughness of his inspection suggested a level of detail that normally required documentation. Webb simply remembered things he had decided to care about. When he walked out into the mid-morning light, he revised his operational timeline from 20 months to 17. The main structure had been kept up with more care than the listing suggested. The cold storage was entirely functional. The HVAC would need recertification but not replacement. He sat in his truck for a while before starting the engine, looking at the 3 buildings through the windshield. He thought about the fact that Howard Finch had told him, in that meeting, exactly what he planned to build and exactly where. He thought about Christine Aldgate's word, solid. He thought about the Kellerman photo on his office wall, all those people in white coats standing in front of a facility not unlike the one behind him now, and about how far away that felt and how close it still was inside him. He started the truck and went to pick up Aiden. The purchase closed on a Thursday, no announcement, no press release. Aiden knew because Webb had told him plainly, the way he told Aiden most things, that his dad had bought a building and was going to build something there. Aiden had asked if he could see it sometime. Webb had said yes. The hiring process began the following week, conducted through Webb's existing professional networks, through Kellerman contacts who had scattered to practices and research institutions across the region, and through one carefully placed message in a veterinary professional forum that described the opportunity without naming the location or the principals. The message was specific about what the work would require and general about everything else. The people who responded to it were not the people who responded to generic job postings. They were people who read the description and recognize something in it. Among the first 12 people hired, 4 had previously worked at agricultural research facilities that had since closed. They came to the first walkthrough of the Bellhaven buildings with the focused, slightly restless energy of people who had been working in spaces that were too small for what they knew how to do. Webb showed them the facility without ceremony. He answered their questions directly. He told them what the timeline was and what the first phase of operation would look like, and then he asked what they needed. They told him. He wrote it down. He got it for them. It took 16 months from close to first operation, 1 month ahead of Webb's original projection. The diagnostics lab was the first component to go live, and its initial capacity exceeded what most comparable facilities in the state could offer, because Webb had designed the process workflow himself and had made integration decisions that reflected 14 years of research experience rather than a general contractor's template. Vantage Medical Group, in the months Webb was building, had been moving forward on its own Bellhaven plans, which now required a different site entirely at higher cost, in a location without the infrastructure advantages of the original property. Howard Finch had not understood the significance of losing the Bellhaven site until 3 months after the county trust filed the completed transfer documentation, at which point the construction planning for the Vantage Regional Hub was already underway on the alternate site, and unwinding it was not a practical option. Christine Aldgate learned of Carver Agricultural and Clinical Services from a trade publication notice about the diagnostic lab's opening. She read the brief paragraph twice. She looked up the LLC filing, she found Webb's name, and then, below it, his professional history, which the LLC registration had not mentioned, but which a 30-second search made plain. Kellerman Agricultural Sciences, 14 years. 2 published diagnostic protocols. Federal citation. She sat with her laptop open for a while before closing it. The county agriculture office sent a liaison to the Bellhaven facility in the 4th month of operation to discuss a potential partnership on a livestock disease monitoring program that the state had been trying to staff for 2 years without finding anyone with the right combination of clinical and research experience. The liaison was a careful, practical woman named Doris Waverly, who had been in county agriculture for 18 years and who had a short list of people she trusted and a longer list of people she had learned not to. She met Webb in the main building where 2 of his team were running the first evaluation batch for a regional cooperative of cattle operations. She watched for a few minutes. She asked technical questions. He answered them without condescension and without abbreviation. She said she had been trying to find the right fit for this monitoring program for a long time. He said he thought they could probably help each other. They shook hands. Doris Waverly drove back to the county office and recommended the partnership in writing that afternoon. The first contract outside the agricultural partnership came from a specialty referral network that had been operating in the region for 6 years and had never had a diagnostics partner it trusted to handle equine cases. They had found Carver through a recommendation from a practice in the next county, which had found them through a Kellerman contact of Webb's, which was how most things had moved in this industry when they moved at all, not through advertising, but through the slow accumulation of reputation among people who had already been burned by the alternative. The contract was not large by the standards of a corporate acquisition. It was the beginning of a referral relationship that grew without needing to be managed because the results managed it. By the 18th month, Carver Agricultural and Clinical Services had 4 active partnerships and a 5th under negotiation with a university extension program that had been looking for a clinical affiliate capable of supporting student practicums in both small and large animal settings. The extension program's department chair, a veterinarian named Dr. Paul Weston, had visited the facility twice before initiating the conversation, both times unannounced, standing in the public-facing sections of the building and watching what was happening around him with the quiet assessment of someone who had made enough wrong decisions to have become careful. On his second visit, he had found Webb at a workbench in the small equipment room off the main lab, recalibrating a diagnostic unit by hand because the automated calibration routine had flagged an inconsistency he wanted to verify manually. Weston had watched him for a moment before Webb noticed him. Webb had looked up and said hello. He had not asked what Weston was doing there because the answer was obvious. Weston had said he was ready to have a conversation. Webb had set down the instrument, washed his hands, and pointed toward the office. The partnership agreement, when it was finalized, included a provision that allowed extension students to rotate through the diagnostics lab and the large animal consultation service across 3 semesters a year. It was the kind of arrangement that would have been impossible to structure with a corporate veterinary chain and straightforward to structure with a person who understood what education required because he had done it himself. Howard Finch read about the university partnership in a regional business brief that his administrative assistant forwarded to him as part of a weekly industry summary. He read the paragraph twice. He went back to the Belhaven property record, which he had looked at once before and set aside. He looked at the transfer date and the acquiring entity's name and the number the county had accepted. He closed the document. He did not bring it to Christine Aldgate's attention. He did not mention Carver Agricultural and Clinical Services in any meeting he attended that month. He submitted his quarterly report to the regional vice president the following week, with language about competitive market dynamics and adjusted site selection timelines that was professionally framed and technically accurate, and that did not include the words Belhaven or Carver. Petra, who had been at the Delwood Clinic since before Webb had even considered expanding, heard about the Belhaven facility from a client who had taken her dog to the referral partner that used Carver's diagnostics lab. The client mentioned it in passing, the way people mention things they assume are already known, and Petra had nodded along, and then later, after the client left, had looked up the facility name on her phone. She had stood at the front counter of the Delwood Clinic for a while after that. She looked at the mismatched chairs. She looked at the filled crack in the counter. She thought about Howard Finch standing at the window, scrolling through his phone, assessing. She thought about Christine Aldgate's word, solid, and the slight inflection that had made it a ceiling rather than a description. She was still thinking about it when Webb came through the back door that afternoon. She looked at him. He looked at her. He asked if something was up. She said she had just heard about Belhaven. He said he was going to mention it to her. She asked why he hadn't. He said he had been waiting for the right time. She said that was a very Webb Carver thing to say. He almost smiled. He said she could transfer to the Belhaven staff if she wanted to, or she could stay at Delwood, which he was keeping open because the town still needed it. Either way, he said she wasn't losing her job. She said she would think about it. She went to Belhaven. It took her 2 weeks to decide, and then she went. She called it one of the 5 best decisions she had made as an adult, though she only said that once and not to Webb directly. The Delwood Clinic stayed open under a veterinarian Webb recruited from a practice in the next county. A quiet woman named Dr. Frances Mott, who had been looking for exactly this kind of position for 2 years, and who within 4 months had rebuilt the patient schedule to a point where the clinic had a 2-week waiting list for new clients. Howard Finch drove past Delwood Veterinary Clinic on a Tuesday in November, on his way to a site assessment meeting for the alternate Vantage Hub location. He drove slowly enough to see that the sign in the window had changed. The light was on inside. Through the window he could see the waiting room, which had new chairs, all matching, and a young couple sitting in 2 of them with a dog on a leash, and a child's drawing of a cat taped to the inside of the glass, slightly crooked, which suggested it had been put there by someone small who had reached as high as they could. He did not stop. He drove to his meeting. Webb was at Bellhaven that morning in the large animal consult area, working through a case that had come in from the county extension program, a complex respiratory presentation in a 6-year-old mare that had been misdiagnosed twice before reaching him. He was not thinking about Howard Finch. He was not thinking about Vantage Medical Group. He was not thinking about Christine Aldgate or Solid or the revised timeline for a regional hub that was now costing significantly more than it would have cost at the site it was originally planned for. He was thinking about the horse. He was reading the prior diagnostic reports and cross-referencing them against a pattern he had seen twice in his Kellerman years and once since, a pattern that was uncommon enough to be missed by people who had not spent significant time in research settings, and common enough once you knew it to be treated effectively if you caught it before the third presentation. He caught it. He made a note. He ordered a specific blood work panel. He wrote a treatment recommendation that was 3 pages long, and that the extension student standing nearby, a second year from the university program, read with the focused attention of someone encountering information they will not forget. The student asked a question. Webb answered it. The student asked a follow-up. Webb answered that too, and then explained the underlying mechanism, because explaining the mechanism was the difference between a student who would recognize the pattern next time and a student who would have to be told again. That evening, Aiden's aquarium had a new fish. Aiden explained the fish's genus and specific environmental requirements during dinner with the seriousness of a conference presentation. Webb listened to all of it and asked 2 questions that Aiden answered with visible satisfaction. After dinner, Aiden went back to the aquarium. Webb sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the treatment notes from the morning case. He read through them once more, adjusted a dosage notation, and set them aside. Henry Brask had texted earlier in the day. He said the university extension contract had processed. He said the numbers for the year were looking significantly better than the original projection. He said, in his characteristically direct way, that he was glad Webb had made the call when he did. Webb read the message and set his phone face down on the table. He thought about the morning at the Delwood Clinic when Howard Finch had stood at the window with his card and his practiced assessment and his word, community level, offered in the specific tone that distinguished it from a compliment. He thought about Christine Aldgate's folder on his desk, the growth projections, the slide, the revised offer. He thought about the Bellhaven buildings standing in the spring morning light while he walked through them, noting each thing carefully, deciding. He thought about the fact that none of it, the building, the contracts, the university partnership, the mayor diagnosed correctly after 2 misses, the extension student who would carry that knowledge forward, none of it had required him to be louder than the work. He picked up his coffee. He looked at the stack of case files on the far end of the table, the work for tomorrow already waiting. Then he turned off the kitchen light and went down the hall to say goodnight to his son.